Now when we look through the history of the World Wide Web Wikipedia entry, we see that we have yet another type of element that we have yet to define, and that is a quote. Now the first quote that happens in this document is is right here, actually, right under the 1980 through 1991 header 2. And there you go. In August 2004, I wrote the proposal, blah blah blah. Okay. In the document that you have, I changed it up slightly. Yeah, I didn't by any means change the quote, but I also added who quoted it. So just so we have an idea, so it's clear, because in the Wikipedia entry it's right down there, and then you got to look at the link. So, well, there are HTML attributes or HTML elements that we can add to this to make it a quote. So the first one I'm going to introduce in this video is blockquote. And blockquote is what we're going to use to wrap the entire quote around in. Now, the blockquote is going to gives this content the attribute that it is a quote from somebody else. So by default it's going to have some styling differences. Of course, like anything, we could always style it with CSS any which way we want, but let's at least see what the default look is. So let me scroll down. Here we go. So here is the paragraph text that the quote is within. So what I'm going to do is add a block quote at the very beginning and then close it at the very end. Now, it's important that you keep the paragraph, the p tags, still on there, because they also define what it is inside there. Because you could be quoting a bullet list maybe from somebody, or it could be 2-paragraph quote, that kind of thing. And so just so you know, oops, let me fix my quote over here. It's not block, it's block quote. So because the important thing to remember is that block quote kind of wraps up the content, but the content wraps up a quote, but you still kind of add some of those really basic elements, because for example, we may even want to put a link in there, so all that stuff gets nested inside. Now, block quote is a block level element, which means that it adheres to certain CSS attributes and concepts like padding and margin. Now, I just refreshed the page and you could see how by default it indented it. Because the paragraph was also a block level element, there wasn't much of a change. So let me just show you exactly what I mean by a block level element. I'm going to go inside of this quote and just add block quote right in the middle, just smack somewhere in the middle, and save it. And now let me show you how that's going to change what we're looking at here. I'm going to refresh the page. And you already see that after I did that, what I did is wrap the block quote in internet site in Europe and you see how it kind of gave a space at the top and above. Well, this is what block level elements do by default. They kind of block themselves. They can block themselves. They have their own space above and below, unlike a inline level element. And I'm going to show you an example of an inline level element that's going to be appropriate for this quote. Now, you notice that this quote has two parts. If we look at the actual quote, there's the quote itself, and then at the end we're citing who said the quote. But we wrap this whole thing in the block quote, but we kind of want to give this ending over here a special designation, and that is with the cite, C-I-T-E element. And the cite element is an inline level element, and what I mean by that is, so keep your eye on the portion that's highlighted here. I'll refresh it, and you see it didn't add that space like the block level element did. It just by default italicized this content. So if we go back to that example of when I put blockquote as internet site in Europe, and if I do cite over there, we'll see that unlike putting blockquote, I guess it's going to be right around here. You see, it just slightly made it a bit different, but italicized it. So really, those two tags, block and cite, they do two things. For one, they add semantic value to the quote itself. And the second thing they do, they're more easily they create targets, easy targets for us to use CSS on. And what I mean, for example, is now, because I've defined one thing as a cite and the other thing as a block quote, I could do something like cite, and let me just go color green. Not that this is gonna be the style I want it to be, but when I refresh it, all of a sudden you could see how now I could redefine that color. Or I could put another attribute, you know, I go font weight normal. Well, I guess the point was the italicis must be a font style. But anyway, I digress. I guess the point of this was to show you how not only adding HTML that's semantic is helpful within the document and more descriptive in the document, but also it gives us certain hooks that we could use CSS on to help us target specific elements and style them the way we want. So now that I've finished that, I'm going to work my way down the document and find any other quotes and do exactly the same thing.